Have you
Look
ever
at the
had a
snow
moment that
girls, it's
changed
so
the entire
beautiful.
course of your life?
So pretty.
It is.
One
Winter
decision,
Wonderland.
1 second that altered everything? If this video already has you feeling something, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us of the magic that exists in everyday moments. Emma Matthews stood in the doorway of Holloway's Cafe, her hand already pushing against the glass door. Cold December air rushed in around her ankles as she glanced back one last time at the man sitting alone at the corner table, absently scrolling through his phone. 2 hours of awkward attempts at conversation, of him speaking too quickly despite her repeated reminders that she needed to read his lips, of him looking uncomfortable every time she used sign language with the server who, thankfully, knew the basics. 2 hours was enough. She'd given this blind date more than a fair chance. The Christmas lights strung across the cafe ceiling blurred slightly as tears of frustration welled in her eyes. At 32, Emma was tired of trying to make hearing people comfortable, tired of being the one to always accommodate, tired of first dates that never turned into seconds because most men couldn't see past the hearing aids tucked behind her ears and the hands that moved with practiced grace to form words when speech failed her. She pushed the door open wider, ready to step out into the snow-dusted streets of Chicago, when a small hand tugged at her coat. Emma looked down to find identical faces staring up at her, twin girls, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with matching red Christmas dresses and dark braids. For a moment, Emma thought they were lost or looking for their parents. Then, in perfect synchronization, their little hands began to move. "Please don't go," they signed, their movements fluid and natural. "Our daddy is nervous, that's all." Emma froze, the cold air momentarily forgotten as she looked from the twins back to the man at the table, who was now standing, his face a mixture of embarrassment and hope. For the first time, Emma noticed the small notebook beside his coffee cup, filled with hastily scrawled phrases and what looked like simple sign language diagrams. This is where Emma's story truly begins, not with a perfect meet-cute, but with a messy, real moment of connection that almost slipped away. And as someone who had spent her entire life living between two worlds, Emma recognized something incredibly rare when she saw it: effort. Growing up deaf in a hearing family had shaped Emma in ways both challenging and beautiful. Her parents had learned sign language alongside her after her diagnosis at age 3, but beyond the walls of their home, the world remained largely inaccessible. Every classroom, every job interview, every social gathering became an exercise in translation and patience. By the time she graduated college with a degree in graphic design, Emma had become an expert at reading the subtle cues that told her when people were merely tolerating her presence versus genuinely wanting to connect. Mark Wilson, the man at the corner table, had been set up with Emma through a mutual friend who swore they were perfect for each other. "He's kind, he's creative, and he's a great dad," her friend Leah had insisted. What Leah had failed to mention was that Mark was as nervous about dating a deaf woman as most men Emma had encountered. The difference was that Mark was willing to try. As a widower raising twin daughters after losing his wife to cancer 3 years earlier, Mark's life had been consumed by grief and the monumental task of being both mother and father to Lily and Luna. Dating hadn't been on his radar until recently, when his daughters began asking innocent questions about why other children had 2 parents while they only had one. Their mother's memory was sacred in their home, but Mark had slowly begun to accept that loving someone new wouldn't diminish what he'd shared with his late wife. The twins had been the ones to insist on learning sign language when Leah mentioned setting their father up with Emma. "What if she becomes our new mom?" Lily had asked with a child's directness. "We should learn how to talk to her." For 6 weeks before the date, the girls had been practicing basic signs with the help of online videos, keeping it a secret from their father until the night before, when they proudly demonstrated their new skills. Mark had stayed up until 3 in the morning, frantically trying to learn enough to at least introduce himself properly. He'd arrived at the cafe with a notebook full of phrases and a knot of anxiety in his stomach, terrified of offending Emma or making a fool of himself. When she'd arrived, her warm smile had momentarily eased his nerves, but as the date progressed, his confidence waned. Every time he fumbled with his limited sign vocabulary or spoke too quickly for her to read his lips, he saw a flicker of disappointment cross her face. Now, as Emma stood caught between leaving and staying, something shifted in the air between them. She looked at the twins, their small faces earnest and hopeful, then back at Mark, who was now approaching with a tentative smile. "I'm sorry," he signed clumsily, his movements unpracticed but sincere. "I'm trying." Those two words, "I'm trying," hit Emma with unexpected force. How many times had she wished for just that? Not perfection, not immediate understanding, but the simple willingness to try. "These are my daughters," Mark continued, switching to speech as his sign vocabulary ran out. He spoke slowly, making sure to face Emma directly so she could read his lips. "Lily and Luna. They've been practicing sign language for weeks because they wanted to meet you." Emma knelt down to the girl's level, her heart softening as they beamed at her. "You learned to sign for me?" she asked, her hands forming the words as she spoke. Luna nodded enthusiastically. "We know the alphabet and colors and animals," she signed, her small hands moving with deliberate care. "And we can say, 'Please stay for dessert,'" Lily added, her signs mirroring her sister's. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside Emma, a genuine laugh that she hadn't expected to find on this date. She looked up at Mark, who was watching his daughters with a mixture of pride and wonder. "They didn't tell me they were learning until yesterday," he explained, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. "I tried to cram as much as I could last night, but obviously I have a lot to learn." The honesty in his admission touched something in Emma. She had spent so much of her life accommodating others, moving between the deaf and hearing worlds with exhausting vigilance, that the simple acknowledgement of effort felt like a gift. "I think we all have a lot to learn," Emma signed and spoke simultaneously, a practice she'd developed to bridge communication gaps. "And maybe dessert is a good place to start." The relief on Mark's face was palpable as they returned to the table, the twins skipping ahead with excitement. What followed was not a perfect date by any conventional standard, there were still awkward pauses and communication hurdles, but there was also laughter, particularly when the twins insisted on ordering dessert entirely in sign language, resulting in an extra scoop of ice cream from the charmed server. As the evening drew to a close, Emma found herself reluctant to leave. There was something about Mark's genuine effort and his daughter's enthusiasm that had broken through the defensive walls she'd built after years of dating disappointments. When he asked if he could see her again, Emma didn't hesitate before nodding. "Next time," she suggested with a smile, "maybe we could do something the girls would enjoy too." The look of surprise and pleasure on Mark's face told her she'd said exactly the right thing. Most men she dated seemed uncomfortable with the idea that she was interested in their whole lives, including their children. But Emma had always wanted a family, and watching Mark with his daughters, patient, loving, and encouraging, had shown her more about his character than hours of conversation could have. The weeks leading up to Christmas unfolded in a series of dates that defied Emma's expectations. Rather than the typical dinner and movie routine, Mark suggested outings that incorporated both his daughters and activities where communication barriers were minimized. They visited a hands-on science museum where the exhibits were visually engaging, they went ice skating at Millennium Park, where physical movement replaced the need for constant conversation, they attended a children's holiday play that featured both spoken dialogue and sign language interpretation. With each encounter, Emma watched as Mark and the twins expanded their sign language vocabulary. They made mistakes, sometimes hilarious ones, like when Mark accidentally signed monkey instead of cookie, but they never stopped trying. For Emma, who had grown accustomed to being the only one making an effort, their dedication was deeply moving. What Emma didn't initially realize was the profound effect she was having on the Wilson family. For Mark, whose world had narrowed to work and parenting after his wife's death, Emma represented not just a second chance at love but a new way of experiencing the world. He found himself noticing the visual aspects of his environment more acutely, the play of light and shadow, the subtle shifts in facial expression, the dance of hands through air that could convey as much meaning as spoken words. For Lily and Luna, Emma was a window into a different way of being. They absorbed sign language with the remarkable plasticity of young minds, often racing ahead of their father in fluency. At school, they proudly taught their friends simple signs and corrected teachers who mistakenly referred to sign language as hand signals. Their Christmas wish lists that year included books about deaf culture and history alongside the typical requests for toys and games. As December 25th approached, Emma found herself included in the Wilson family's holiday traditions. Mark invited her to help decorate their tree, a chaotic evening filled with tangled lights and stories behind each ornament. Many of them had been made by his late wife, Sarah, whose presence was still honored in their home through photographs and memories shared openly. Rather than feeling threatened by Sarah's memory, Emma appreciated the way Mark spoke of her with love and respect. "She would have liked you," he told Emma one evening after the twins had gone to bed. They were sitting on the couch, a fire crackling in the hearth, mugs of hot chocolate warming their hands. Sarah always said that love multiplies rather than divides. It was the first time either of them had used the word love, and the moment hung between them, fragile and significant. Emma studied Mark's face, noting the way the firelight softened the lines around his eyes, lines that spoke of both laughter and grief. "I'm not trying to replace her," Emma signed, her movements gentle in the dim light. "I know," Mark replied, attempting to sign along with his words. "And that's one of the reasons I'm falling in love with you." The admission should have scared Emma. 3 weeks was a remarkably short time to develop such feelings, especially for two people with complex lives and the added challenge of communication differences. But sitting there in the warm glow of Christmas lights, watching as this man who had known profound loss took the risk of opening his heart again, Emma felt not fear but a sense of coming home. Christmas Eve arrived with a heavy snowfall that transformed Chicago into a winter wonderland. Mark had invited Emma to join their family tradition of attending a candlelight service, followed by opening one gift each before bed. Emma had been hesitant about the church service, knowing from experience that such events rarely made accommodations for deaf attendees, but Mark had surprised her by finding a service with a sign language interpreter. As they sat in the pew, the twins between them, Emma was moved by the beauty of familiar carols being signed in perfect synchronization with the music. The interpreter's hands flowed like water, capturing not just the words but the emotion of each hymn. When the congregation lifted candles during Silent Night, the visual impact of hundreds of tiny flames illuminating the darkness brought tears to Emma's eyes. Later, at Mark's home, the twins could barely contain their excitement as they each selected one gift to open. Lily chose a small package from Emma, gasping with delight when she unwrapped a set of fingerless gloves. "So my hands stay warm but I can still sign outside," she exclaimed, immediately putting them on and practicing the alphabet with newly protected fingers. Luna's choice was a larger box from her father, which contained a beginner's pottery wheel. "Because Emma told us she used to make pottery with her dad," Luna explained, her eyes shining. "Now maybe she can teach us." The thoughtfulness behind the gift, the way Mark had listened to a casual mention of Emma's childhood and transformed it into a meaningful present, touched her deeply. When it was Emma's turn, she selected a small envelope from Mark with curiosity. Inside was a certificate for a 10-week sign language course, not for Emma, but for Mark. "I've been learning bits and pieces," he explained, his expression earnest, "but I want to do this right. I want to be able to speak your language fluently, not just phrases here and there." Emma's throat tightened with emotion as she handed Mark her gift to him. By some strange coincidence, she had bought him a similar certificate, this one for a weekend workshop on deaf culture and history. Because knowing the language is only part of understanding, she signed, her hands slightly unsteady. The coincidence of their gifts, the way they had both chosen to invest in understanding each other's worlds, seemed to crystallize something between them. As the twins excitedly sorted through the remaining presents under the tree, speculating about what each might contain, Mark took Emma's hand. "I have one more thing for you," he said quietly. "But it's not wrapped." From his pocket, he withdrew a key attached to a small wooden ornament shaped like a house. "This is to our home," he explained, his voice low enough that the twins wouldn't hear. "Not for moving in, it's too soon for that, but so you know you're always welcome here. So you never have to feel like a guest." The gesture was so unexpected, so perfectly calibrated to address Emma's unspoken fear of remaining peripheral in their lives, that she couldn't immediately respond. Instead, she wrapped her arms around him, hoping he could feel what she couldn't yet fully express in either spoken words or signs. That night, as Mark drove Emma home through streets hushed by falling snow, she reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had led her to this moment. If she had walked out of that cafe as she'd intended, if those twin girls hadn't tugged at her coat and signed those simple words, "Please don't go," she would have missed the chance to discover what genuine acceptance felt like. When Mark pulled up in front of her apartment building, he turned to face her directly, making sure she could see his lips in the dim light. "Tonight made me realize something," he said. "For years after Sarah died, Christmas felt like something to endure rather than celebrate. The girls would get excited, and I'd go through the motions for their sake, but the joy was missing for me." He paused, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from Emma's face. "Tonight, I felt it again. That warmth, that sense that the world is full of wonder and possibilities. You gave us that gift, Emma." Emma's heart swelled with emotion. In the deaf community, there was a concept that hearing people often struggled to understand, the idea that deafness wasn't a deficit but a different way of experiencing the world, rich with its own culture and perspective. For years, she had dated men who had viewed her deafness as an obstacle to overcome or, worse, as a defining limitation. Mark was the first to see it as simply one facet of who she was, important, yes, but no more defining than his status as a widower or a father. "Christmas has always been complicated for me too," Emma admitted, sighing as she spoke. "All those family gatherings where everyone talks at once, and I catch maybe half of what's being said. All those carols I know by heart but experience differently. All those holiday movies without captions." She smiled, the light from a nearby street lamp catching the movement. Tonight felt like belonging. Their goodnight kiss was gentle, a promise of more to come. As Emma watched Mark's car disappear down the snowy street, she thought about the journey ahead. There would be challenges, certainly, cultural misunderstandings to navigate, communication gaps to bridge, the complexities of blending her life with a ready-made family. But for the first time in her adult life, Emma felt she had found someone willing to meet her halfway, to learn her language, to see the world partially through her eyes. The following morning, Christmas Day, Emma woke to the soft buzz of her phone against her nightstand. A video message from Mark showed Lily and Luna still in their pajamas, signing "Merry Christmas" and "We miss you" with exaggerated expressions that made her laugh out loud. Behind them, Mark signed "Come for breakfast," with raised eyebrows and a hopeful smile. The invitation felt like the beginning of a new chapter. As Emma dressed warmly for the short walk to Mark's house, her new key tucked safely in her coat pocket, she thought about all the Christmas mornings that might lie ahead. Mornings filled with small hands signing excitedly about presents, with shared languages both spoken and signed, with the beautiful complexity of a family formed not by blood or obligation but by choice and love. When she arrived at Mark's door, she didn't need to knock or ring the bell. The door swung open as if they had been watching for her, and the twins rushed forward with synchronized hugs. Behind them stood Mark, holding a mug of coffee prepared exactly as she liked it. On the wall behind him hung a new addition to their holiday decorations, a framed print that read, "Love is spoken here," in both English and American Sign Language. "Welcome home," Mark signed, his movements more confident than they had been just weeks before. And Emma knew, with a certainty that resonated through her entire being, that she was exactly where she belonged. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more content that celebrates the unexpected ways love finds us. Remember that sometimes, the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we choose to stay rather than walk away, when we give second chances not just to others, but to ourselves and the possibility of joy. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.